Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our 4 p.m. briefing, the state of the U.S. scientific enterprise with AGU's president, Brandon Jones, and our executive director and CEO, Janice Lachance. We'll begin with some opening remarks, followed by some questions from the press. If you're in the room, just raise your hand and give your name and affiliation. If you're online, you can enter your question in the Q&A chat box and we'll read it aloud for you. Or if you want to ask questions yourself aloud, just type that in the box and we'll unmute you. So, all right, Brandon, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, and thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As a scientist who spent much of my career inside the federal research system and recently made a decision to leave that system, I want to start by grounding today's conversation squarely in what these decisions mean at home for U.S. researchers, U.S. agencies, and the scientific capacity that keeps our communities safe. What we've experienced this past year is not an abstract policy disagreement. It's a fundamental disruption of the systems that allow science in this country to function. Across the U.S. scientific enterprise, we've seen concrete and damaging effects, and I'll share a few examples. Frozen or canceled grants that directly have affected graduate students, postdocs, and early career researchers across U.S. universities. Deep losses within the federal scientific workforce as both promising early career and seasoned civil servants have been pushed out. Removal or change of critical information on federal websites, for example, the National Climate Assessment, information on human-caused climate change on the EPA site, the NOAA Climate and Disaster Tracking site, and the list goes on and on. The weakening of regulations designed to protect public health and the environment. The administration is proposing to overturn the EPA's endangerment finding, the landmark scientific determination that greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare. And lastly, drastic attempts to cut federal spending in FY26 appropriations. Science in the U.S. relies on stable institutions and a protected workforce. When those erode, so does the country's safety, competitiveness, and resilience. So why does this matter to the American public? Strengthening U.S. science and scientists isn't just about advancing knowledge, it's about supporting the systems that communities rely on every day. So for example, accurate hurricane and flood forecasting, clean air and drinking water, food security and agricultural planning, local climate and public health preparedness. So what has AGU done to step into the gaps and to show up during this time? AGU is standing up for the federal scientific workforce. When the administration ordered mass firings of probationary scientists, we took it to court and we won. We're now challenging a second order that would force sweeping cuts across federal science agencies. And that lawsuit has disrupted their plans to fire scientists in a very significant way. AGU will keep fighting to protect the scientists who safeguard our environment, our health, and our national security. AGU has been actively defending the scientific basis of the EPA endangerment finding. AGU responded by mobilizing more than 1,000 climate and health science experts to submit a joint letter defending the science supporting the finding, portions of which were read into the record during EPA public hearings, emphasizing that decades of rigorous peer-reviewed research continue to show human-driven climate change is real and harmful. AGU is calling on Congress to finalize full-year FY26 appropriations that provide strong, stable funding for agencies such as NASA, NOAA, NSF, USGS, and others. Research cannot thrive on stop and start budgets or prolonged continuing resolutions. Through our online AGU Action Center this year alone, scientists across all 50 states made their voices heard. They have sent over 7,000 emails and made 800 calls to legislators to restore science funding and protect the agencies that serve the public good. AGU is also adamant that when Congress appropriates funds, the executive branch must release and spend them as directed. Withholding congressionally approved science funding damages the U.S. research enterprise.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm just going to add on a little bit to what Brandon said. You all have heard us articulate this before in our publications, in our media statements, in our communications with our members, but I think sometimes it is really good to think about the ramifications of it. So thanks for your patience as I go through this, but I want to thank Brandon. His leadership and frankly, his courage has really changed the way AGU approaches some of these issues, and he's really been an exceptional leader. All of us as we navigate this brand new or newer than or different than usual external environment. I want to focus though on the international dimensions of all of this, because the US scientific enterprise, as you all well know, doesn't exist in isolation. It's really woven into a global system of climate science, risk reduction, and technological innovation. And what we're seeing now is an erosion, not only of the US scientific capacity, but US scientific leadership around the world, something that we have always, as a nation, been able to brag about and be proud about. The administration's decisions have had profound international implications. Everyone, all of you know all of these, but withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the lack of the US government's participation in the IPCC process, which results in the world's leading global climate assessment, dismissal of the national climate assessment authors that really undermined a trusted source of US contributions to global climate science, a retreat from the multilateral scientific cooperation such as COP30. And it has reduced our credibility in global climate and environmental negotiations. Other nations and subnational governments are moving forward in this space without us. And the US continues to step back, and that means that we are forfeiting influence around the world in shaping global science and climate policy. So you could ask, okay, so what's AGU going to do about it, right? So we are not the federal government. However, we are not stepping back at all. We are leaning in, stepping forward. Our international response includes participating in the US Academic Alliance for the IPCC, which ensures that US scientists can still participate in the global climate assessment process in spite of the administration's withdrawal from this system. This actually protects scientific continuity and it maintains US expertise in international reports. We have set up and established the US Climate Collection with the American Meteorological Society in partnership. It's going to be a free-to-read, peer-reviewed collection that provides credible, independent climate assessment science for the United States after the administration dismissed the NCA authors. And AGU is a presence at all the COPs, but we were just at COP30. We co-sponsored the Ocean Pavilion at COP30, and we were the leaders in discussing new and ongoing efforts to keep science at the forefront of global climate action. And we are keeping our global membership engaged. Through our meetings and member resources, AGU is keeping US scientists connected to the world's major scientific institutions and ensuring that American expertise remains part of the global conversation. So the bottom line is we are working hard to ensure that US science remains visible, influential, and connected internationally, regardless of what the US government is doing. So what should all of you and hopefully the scientific community be watching for internationally next year in 2026. So here's what we think are the global trends that we will be monitoring and that we hope others will help us keep an eye on things. So further withdrawal of the US from multilateral science bodies. I don't know what's left, but if there is anything, are we going to continue participating or are we going to pull back? And in addition, is there going to be a sense of antagonism, I'm sorry, such a long day, antagonism by this administration toward those organizations to the extent that they go on the attack to try to diminish their credibility globally, not just here in the United States. Are we going to see reduced influence of the United States in getting global climate and environmental norms established? Are we going to see them participate in the continued erosion of trust from the US, but also from allies who really depend on the US for scientific contributions, both in expertise and monetarily? Will international partners develop new collaborations and exclude the United States because of this? And I'm not really talking about the US government overall. I'm talking about even individual scientists or operating at the academic level. But one example of this is the administration's 2026 budget that calls for eliminating NOAA's research arm, as well as its global monitoring laboratory, which provides the kind of crucial data that goes toward providing a real record of the Earth's buildup of carbon dioxide. If that funding gets canceled, our partners around the world will have to find other means of deriving that data and forming their policies and their practices going forward. And we know if funding comes to ocean and polar research that we typically do in collaboration with other countries, those nations are going to have to adapt and find a new way forward without the United States, both financially and without US expertise. So these are long-term risks, but we believe that science is borderless. Science does not respect political boundaries, lines drawn on the map separating one country from another. And it depends on sustained cooperation. So we are preparing for an extended engagement to help ensure global scientific collaboration to make sure that that system, those partnerships are not fractured any further than they are now. And globally, we believe we must work to ensure the United States remains a leader in climate and earth science, not by stepping back, but by staying engaged, supporting our scientists and reinforcing their ability and opportunities at international collaboration. So happy, maybe sort of happy, not happy to take questions. Depends on the questions.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, we'll open it up to questions and we can start with reporters in the room. Yes.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Harvey. I'm with Politico, E&E News. I wonder if you've seen any trends in attendance at the fall meeting this year in terms of attendance from federal scientists or from international scientists? And if so, would you attribute that to a reaction to the thing you've just been talking about?
Yeah, I think it's probably more than a reaction. I think it's probably policy. We have a very healthy meeting here. We have over 20,000 attendees. And we have met our target, which we're excited about, and exceeded our target, actually. So we're pleased with that, but there's no doubt that there are gaps in the attendance from federal agencies. Some were able to get some scientists here, but it is a much lower number across the board. And some agencies just would not approve travel to the meeting. So it has had an impact. And it's less about the numbers, I think, than the impact on the expertise, the impact on the opportunity to communicate and exchange science and research. So, yeah, we're very disappointed.
Could you share which agencies declined to send attendees at all, you mentioned?
I don't know. I don't think we know that. We'll know more after the meeting, so perhaps we can get back to you with that. Because of the shutdown, a lot of the approvals were the 11th hour, right? They just were delayed, and folks were making their arrangements at the very last minute. AGU's always had a policy that we maintain early bird rates for federal employees till, I mean, today even, or Friday, somebody can come in and register, because we know that the federal government takes a bit longer to approve travel. So I'm not entirely sure that I can give you an accurate answer.
Sure. And just to come back to my other question about international attendees, if you have any data on that or noticed any trends?
Yeah, we can talk with you about that too again afterwards. Our top four, this might be an indicator, our top four countries outside the US are all Asian countries.
Thank you.
Question online?
Rick Mizlewski of the Register asks, does the AGU have a position on Trump v. Slaughter, which would overturn Humphrey's executor and allow Trump to fire any heads of any governmental agencies that he should so choose, and thus take full control of all policymaking and policy implementation agencies of the executive branch?
You want the former director of OPM answering that, or do you want to go?
I want the former director who's also a lawyer.
Yeah. I don't know that we've looked at that specific case of looking at, do we have okay, so she's telling me I'm right. We have not looked at that specific case. However, we have a strong objection to the politicization, making the taking away civil service protections and really making the civil service a tool of the executive branch. I am a former director of the Office of Personnel Management, so I'm pretty passionate about those things. But I'm fortunate that AGU also believes that.
Anyone else in the room?
Okay, Daniel Preston from Dialogue. Is AGU thinking these things that you're doing, are you planning on them going on long term? Is this something you're structuring in that you're going to have to be doing for many years in future? Or are you still in a kind of reaction mode?
Yeah, great question. As Janice mentioned, we probably earlier in the year, we were more in a reactionary mode. And now that we have our footing under us, we're actually leaning in and stepping in. Now, whether it gets integrated into actual operations moving forward, who knows, but at least we'll have something in the toolbox in case something happens again where we can pull from that and move forward in case.
If I
Yeah,
can
sure.
add, I do think we're prepared to do this for as long as it takes. And I think it's also important for AGU to be prepared for what the circumstances will be 10 years from now and even further out. The scientific enterprise in the United States has been so deeply gutted that it is not going to be fixed with a different election. It's going to take years. And again, I am drawing on my personal experience as the former director of the Office of Personnel Management. it's going to take a long time to identify the skills that have been dismissed and fired from the federal workforce. What they're going to look like going forward, what's going to be needed 3, 4, 10 years from now. How does that get described? And how do we recruit for that? It's not going to happen overnight. So we're prepared to stick with it and be here and be strong enough to really help prepare the global system, which I think by then is going to need really some significant help around the world, not just in the United States.
Can I just supplement what? You're talking about this in a really kind of calm and rational way, but how does it make you feel when you see what's happening?
First of all, my feelings. I can say personally, it has been very, very difficult to watch this happen. There are incredibly talented and experienced experts in the federal government who I've gotten to know in my 8 years at AGU, who were summarily dismissed from their jobs. Others who chose to leave so that they wouldn't have to work under these circumstances. I can attest to the brain drain. I think it's very painful to watch. On a personal note, can I do personal, Samson and Liza? I don't know. On a personal note, it's been incredibly painful for me to watch the agency that I led, that was a champion for the civil service, really be weaponized in a way to take apart, to dismantle the civil service system and the federal government. So, but I don't know that it helps to get terribly emotional about it. I think all of us involved in this have to think clearly. We have to think about how best to deploy our resources. What is the talent that we have access to? How can we both counter the policies that they're putting forward by empowering our community to speak out for additional science funding, for some of the scientific principles that are being set aside. And we're determined to do.
Janice, can I just add
Yeah,
a bit to that? So we're focusing on the impacts on the federal government workforce, but there's impacts within the rest of the scientific enterprise, mainly in academia, where grant funding is pooled. And that means graduate students and undergrads and those that might have been supported in their career trajectories are now not. So when we think about what is needed 10 years out or 15 years out, as Janice mentioned, we're talking about generational impacts. These are early career scientists who slog their way through early in their career a pandemic globally that impacted their training, their educational opportunities. And now they're faced with this. Some are leaving by their own choice or funding, what have you. So when we start to figure out what kind of expertise we need in the US to remain strong in science, as we look out over the next decade, well, will those people even be there? So it's complex.
I think we have a few questions online.
Yeah, can I now add something? Go back to the question about attendance. Brandon reminded me of something. This conference seems to have maintained its fairly high percentage of student and early career attendees. So that is a hopeful sign, right? That's a good sign that the next generation of scientists recognizes the power of the network that is AGU, recognizes the opportunities that are here, and that this is how they can advance their careers. But they have lost this fundamental support that Brandon has described. So we're very happy to know that we can still be a resource for them.
Thank you.
Any
Um,
questions from the room before we go online?
Hi, Alex with Nature Magazine. On the question of attendance, we did throw a dart at the dartboard and published a story today where we asked kind of the 12 large science societies what their attendance trends were like, and it was kind of all over the map for a number of reasons. But anyway,
Yeah.
I would love to know what you guys see in the end. But actually,
Now I have to read your.
okay. My question is for you. I want to know what kind of pushback, if any, you've gotten from the administration. I mean, AGU has been very outspoken and the various lawsuits and so on and so forth. Do you get calls? Do you get emails? Do you get people pulling you aside from the administration and, you know, chewing you out for this?
I turn to our policy expert. I haven't heard, but I.
No,
I don't
no,
know.
we do
Yeah,
not. We,
We
no,
haven't.
no, we've had meetings with them, with some very high officials. They've always been very cordial. They've listened and, they've listened.
Not sure what that means. I mean, we leaned in and we're gonna continue to lean in.
And, but there's an awareness. They know where we stand.
So when Marcia McNabb described getting pulled in for a conversation after the report on the endangerment finding that the academies put out, that was striking to hear her say that publicly for the
Yes.
first time. So I was just kind of assuming that you all were getting similar pushback, even though you're different, you're not the academies, no?
Not at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we had, at the beginning of the year, we had some small federal grants that were ended in the administration's push to wrap up grants that they did not agree with, and they were in the DEI area. But we don't rely on the federal government for our funding, and so we might be in a slightly different position than the academy for that reason. But yeah, I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that.
We have a question from Barbara Moran from WBUR in Boston. Barbara says, I'm having a hard time keeping track of the proposed federal budget. Any sense of when it will be finalized, and how are you keeping an eye on what's being cut?
Yeah, when will it be finalized? It has become kind of a rolling process, right? Like, I'm looking at Lexi, who's our Vice President for Public Policy, Science Policy, and Government Relations. She does it, she and her team do a great job, and they get a lot of support from our communications staff as well. I don't think, I mean, it's just a rolling process, and I don't know that it ever gets done. We just kind of go from continuing resolution to continuing resolution. Some agencies, like the Department of Defense, do a little bit better on that. They have a little bit more stability. But Lexi, you want to predict when the FY 2026 budget is going to get done?
Yeah, I stopped predicting a long time ago, but
Yeah.
I will say I expect this to go straight up until January 30th in the next CR. And again, I do know that there is an effort to try to combine some of the appropriations bills into what's called a minibus, sort of like the small omnibus, and that includes a number of the bills that would fund the agencies that are incredibly important to these members, like NOAA, NASA, NSF, USGS, for example. I think there's a possibility that that gets done before the next meeting resolution of that, but it is anyone's guess at any moment.
Joanna Marsh with the Civic Science Observer asks, how have the political and funding changes affected participatory science and/or citizen science opportunities in the US? What advice would you give to those researchers grappling with potential funding holes?
Funding.
I could do
Yeah.
funding. So there has been an impact, as Janice just mentioned. Some of the small grants that we had were DEI focused, and within, for instance, NSF, many of the DEI programs included community science and collaboration with non-technical or non-scientific participants, et cetera. So there has been some impact. Now, moving forward, be connected to organizations like AGU, where we might not be able to provide funding, but we can provide other forms of professional currency. where come to the meeting and we have access to all of this scientific expertise or career support or trainings on how to interface with decision makers at the local level. If scientists want to stand up and say something and do something, but maybe they're not comfortable, we're providing that space and that place with the expertise and professional acumen of the staff where they can get what they need. So,
Any other questions?
Chelsea again in Politico. I noticed you have quite a few sessions, panels, et cetera, on the subject of how scientists can engage with policy or with policymakers, the political process. Was that a response to requests from the scientific community? To what extent have you seen an increase in the appetite from scientists for those kinds of training sessions and to sort of increase their political engagement generally this year?
We have always done those, but I think they're getting a different level of attention this year. I think there's an added interest in getting involved and in learning those skills on how to do that effectively. So I think there's also a recognition that those skills can help them in their careers. So as they're trying to deal with these shifts in job opportunities, knowing or being able to bring something to the table that they can communicate with policymakers, that they can communicate with the media, I think is another added bonus for them. We have seen a greater interest in participation. We have a wonderful system where people can very easily let their views be known to their members of Congress. And we have a lot more people involved in that than we have in the past. But there is a very, very strong interest in this. And I think even if people may not want to get involved in policy work themselves, I think there's an interest in wanting to understand how this all works. The question we got about the budget and, how does funding for my agency work? 5 years ago, maybe that was less important, 10 years ago. But now, I think there's an increased interest. And Lexi, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We have one more online question. Anyone else in the room before we get to it? Okay, this is Barbara Moran from WBUR again. I've seen some attempts by scientists to reframe their research to align with the Trump administration, like energy dominance instead of renewable energy. Has this had any success? Arctic research, for instance, seems important to Trump administration goals, but it's getting cut anyway.
Want to try that?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah,
And
well-
it's too early to tell.
Well, yeah, I think that federal scientists certainly have had to react to those directives from the administration. They've been very specific about the kinds of words that can be used, the vocabulary. And my impression is that scientists will comply with that, in part because they have to, but also if it advances their research, if it gives them an opportunity to have the research go public or be published, then I think that some of those limits on the kinds of words that they are allowed to use have had an effect.
Any other questions in the room? Any other questions online? Right, if there are no further questions, thank you so much for attending. This concludes our briefing. A recording will be available on our YouTube channel tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.